Episode 4 of Series 14 is just released, which is mental, and I'm sure I'll talk about it soon. But with this new era, the Timeless Child has remained a subject of conversation, since it was such a massive feeling revelation at the time, and an even bigger reaction amongst the fandom, it felt impossible to ignore. But at the same time, there weren't high expectations of Davies taking it anywhere, just kind of, if anything, ignoring it. But in his second episode back, we have it mentioned pretty clearly. A moment that is the first major hint at what these specials are truly about. The character's feelings about what he discovered through the Timeless Child. Except the focus is laid on the Doctor's emotions, dealing with the fact he actually doesn't know where he's from, making him an orphan. Which was never looked into in the Chibnall era. It was just a lore thing and just a backstory thing, not actual character.
But what really happened?
A lot.
As Ncuti has taken control of the TARDIS, the Timeless Child storyline has been turned into a really interesting facet to the character of the Doctor. We focus on the character implications, which is that the Doctor recently discovered his childhood wasn't what he thought, and that he was found and actually taken in. It's attempted to take a look at a divisive storyline from a new angle, and I think it's added a new and genuinely interesting layer to the Doctor. 14 bearing the horror of everything he's been through, along with the recent finding out that he was an orphan. 15 accepting and attempting a life moved on from everything, enjoying the freedom with no strings attached. With this new angle provided, it got me curious. Being 4 years since the Timeless Children aired and we had that reveal, how would it feel going back to give that a watch? With the time past, how would it feel now? Whilst technically this storyline you could say runs through the entire Whittaker era, even though it was just one line in Series 11, but it's the main focus of Series 12. But particularly in the final 3 episodes that were unexpectedly linked, similar to the final trilogy of episodes in Series 3 that started with Utopia.
He's trying to get in.
Starting with an episode that is written brilliantly by Maxine Alderton and directed by Emma Sullivan. This is probably my favourite episode in this era, and we'll look at this episode individually and isolated at another point. But this episode is great as an opener to the story that would expand over the final 2 episodes of the series. A haunted house on the night where Percy Shelley is on the verge of writing Frankenstein, except something is wrong. Percy Shelley is missing. The pre-titles open is really effective at setting the tone, and when the intro plays, it's really well timed, and the introduction of our heroes is actually quite funny. The house looks incredible, and I think there's such a great atmosphere to the episode. The lighting is really nice as well. But as we go along, we realise stuff is very wrong, with stereotypical haunting events going on, and the tone is balanced so well. It creates an effectively creepy atmosphere, as well as not taking itself too seriously, and I think that's always when Doctor Who shines. In that balance between enjoying itself and executing a genuinely interesting premise, with genuine sincerity. Tosin Cole, as much as I think isn't great across the series, I think it's particularly good in this episode alongside Bradley Walsh. Yaz feels like she has nothing to do, as always, but Ryan's reactions feel so grounded whilst also being genuinely funny moments.
There's always an explanation. Oh, it touched me. Ghost, it definitely touched me. Oh.
Ryan, that was my elbow.
And this moment where the butler smashes the hand with the plate is so funny to me because he looks so proud.
Great shot!
As the characters find themselves trapped in different areas of the house with seemingly no way to find others, the stakes rise with everyone being so separated. When we hear the baby crying is when it feels so helpless before John Polidori, I think that's the character's name, somehow starts sleepwalking and just starts going through walls. It's a baffling scene, raising more questions that we eventually find out is because the house isn't actually moving, just the characters' perceptions of the house are shifting. As we find this out, the figure above the lake is becoming more and more prominent. A ghostly figure shining bright in the distance, and the Doctor kind of comes to the idea that this figure is what is causing this massive disturbance, not just in the house but in time. And as it tries to break through into the house, we realise it's the lone Cyberman. It's such a great reveal with the music thumping. I love Seiga Nakanori's track for the Cybermen. The design is just great for him, and the voice combines to make him an instantly threatening figure, with his lines asking, "Where is the Guardian?" establishing that this Cyberman is hunting for something and is already a Terminator-like figure, and he's got no signs of stopping this search. This episode, and the admittedly mixed building of the story arc, has made this character feel so powerful and a genuine threat, and also manages to feel fresh and something like we haven't seen before. A Frankenstein-esque character invading the house where Frankenstein was written, using those haunted house codes and conventions, and then, by the end of the episode, the lone Cyberman seemingly implied to have inspired Shelley to write the original book in Doctor Who's version of history, is really fun and really Doctor Who, and I really like it. The Doctor manages to find out that the Cyberman is after this thing called the Cyberium, which turns out to be an AI from the future that was sent back in time, withholding all cyber knowledge. This makes us actually fear what could happen if he gets his hands on it. That gives Jack's warning the weight that it needed.
Tell the Doctor, the lone Cyberman, don't give it what it wants, at all costs.
Because we know the Cybermen, and so a MacGuffin like this genuinely feels like an important power, an important asset that could cause damage. It's just a shame that we never find out how Captain Jack knows about it, his involvement in it, and that's a problem that we'll get into a little bit later. After a while of searching, they find Percy Shelley hidden in the basement, acting as host to the Cyberium. He has seen the potential destruction that could happen if this Cyberman gets access to it. So he's been shifting the house as well and keeping Ashad away, Ashad being the lone Cyberman, teleporting him in and out of the house and in different rooms to keep him away, but he's slowly getting closer and closer because Shelley can't hold it. The power is overwhelming. The Doctor's speech in this basement is great. Whittaker is great across this entire episode, but this is just a great scene with Ryan saying, "Why not sacrifice one life for the future of humanity?" This creates such a fascinating dynamic for the scene, and is one of my favourite scenes in the whole era, which truly shows the weight the Doctor holds on her shoulders and the position she finds herself in right now. And this could have led to some great character work for the Doctor and Ryan and the companions on the whole, but I guess Chibnall would rather write about a Donald Trump stand-in. The way in which the Doctor extracts the Cyberium is actually quite brutal, showing Shelley a hint of his death, tricking his own brain into thinking he died, and just hoping that he'd survive. The Doctor pulled such a risk, and she was lucky that it paid off, but after doing that and taking the Cyberium herself, Ashad puts her in a corner. Either give him the Cyberium or he will destroy the planet. And the question is he bluffing? Because obviously the world we know doesn't end in this year, but also time is in flux. Maybe he isn't bluffing, maybe the world could end and time could be rewritten. So she hands it over in the hope to save the future in the future. This episode leaves us in an incredible place for the two-part finale. Introduction to a monster that is possibly not entirely sure what it is, seemingly not wanting the human emotion but forced to be stuck with it. The Doctor was cornered, and we feel that at the end of the episode. It feels dangerous, but with a hint of hope that the Doctor can make amends for what she's had to do at the end here. A great episode and a great segue. How does the conclusion actually go though?
But that which is dead can live again in the hands of a believer.
The first half of this episode is more or less exactly what I was hoping for. My only issue in the first half is when the Doctor arrives on the planet, we're told that we're in the far future, and we're told about the state of the universe and what the Cybermen have become, but it's all done through exposition. The only actual effect it has is this brief part of this planet and these last few humans. And I love what happens here. The way that they come in to save the day, and that these are the last 7 humans, I think it was, in the universe, the Doctor reckons. But after setting up all their devices and defences, the Cybermen just wipe through them, just destroy all of them, and the Doctor has to resort to just telling them to run. I think that's brilliant and sets the stakes really well and builds the tension for the episode. It's real good dystopian stuff. Instantly though, Captain Jack should have been brought in here. As I said, we never find out his connection to the lone Cyberman, and maybe there were plans for that originally, I'm not sure, but we don't know how he knew about the Cyberium, and this episode particularly would have slotted him in perfectly. Seeing him in the future that he was trying to prevent it would have been considerably more interesting and generally just made more sense to me, rather than leaving that hole and incorporating him in the New Year special. The weakest part of this episode by far are the scenes set in Ireland, especially knowing what they actually lead to being, which still doesn't make much sense of them. Like, what are you doing here? It just feels so out of place and absolutely bizarre. It wasn't intriguing to me when it aired, and now it's just painful to sit through them. It just drags the episode down. It has seemingly no connection to the story going on, and even after we get the answers, it still feels that way. Despite wishing we could see more of the effect the cyber race being rebuilt has had on the universe, I think the episode generally just about succeeds at making them really threatening. These are apparently the last humans, and the Cybermen are actually effective at killing them, keeping that genuine threat intact. As the Doctor attempts to evacuate everyone off the planet, of course, her and the companions are split up. Herself and Ryan steal a cyber ship and leave to find this border, Koshamas, that is rumoured to hold a gateway taking us to a safer side of the universe, whereas Yaz and Graham are on a ship that's barely functional and are just trying to make distance. This is where the episode feels like it slams the brake a little too much for me. I think we should have spent so much more time experiencing the outcome the Doctor's decision to hand over the Cyberium had. But instead, it's just the opening act of the episode, and it isn't really a part of any more of this story. The Doctor and Ryan actually making it to Koshamas lead to the discovery that it's a guy waiting at this gateway in case there were any more survivors still trying to leave, and it's a glimmer of hope for the entire universe at the moment that there are people like this still out there. Meanwhile, Yaz and Graham realise they've ended up on a cyber carrier where Ashad catches up shortly after. With no Doctor and seemingly no way off this ship, stacked of Cybermen, the tensity again rises. Now, despite the flaws I've mentioned, I think generally this episode just about succeeds in its dystopian far future. On the cyber carrier, there is a genuine sense of jeopardy, and the others reaching the gateway genuinely feels like a final hope and like an answered prayer to these characters. As the Cybermen start to wake up and close in on Yaz and Graham and the others, the Doctor opens the gateway with a beautiful bright pink purple design expanding before them until it reveals Gallifrey. This is a great twist as it is that this is where the gateway leads. After Spyfall Part 2, we knew Gallifrey would have to come back at some point, but it being revealed here is genuinely really shocking. Now, one plot hole I kind of find, unless I just missed a line, is that we don't know if the surviving humans that came here went to Gallifrey, or if it's just now that it's changed to taking them to Gallifrey. But then, if this twist wasn't good enough, the Master returns, energetically leaping through, finding the Doctor right as the Cybermen close in on those on the ship, leaving this episode on another banger of a cliffhanger. So after these first two episodes, the focus has been more on the lone Cyberman and that rise. This battle for the future of humanity and the universe, Ashad intends to remove all organic elements from the Cybermen, which is fascinating. A character who is more human than most of the Cybermen is the one fighting to have the humanity removed. And whilst it goes maybe a little against of the core concept of the Cybermen, I think it's still so interesting and fresh to explore. Chibnall has really set himself up here, and it's a flawed episode, but not a bad episode to me. It's just pretty decent. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, we get to the big question. Did Chibnall stick the landing? Nah, Chibnall really had us clickbaited with this title as well.
What? What's so funny? What happened to the child?
The opening follows up well on the cliffhanger from the previous episode, with Bescott immediately being killed by the storming Cybermen. And the reaction from Yudlami, desperate to go back and save her from being converted, is great, and again, that dire feeling really hits. The Master takes the Doctor through to Gallifrey, stood in its ruins with pride, building the question as to why. It feels not so long ago that the Doctor was able to save Gallifrey. What pushed the Master to destroy it himself and end up as this unhinged incarnation? I think it looks great visually, and I really like the setup of the episode. It feels grand in scale as well as personal to all of the characters. Obviously, we're following a story revolving around Gallifrey as well as the Cybermen. The humans on the cyber ship come to the conclusion that hiding within Cybermen, which is a pretty grim idea, is the only way to avoid Ashad and then get off the ship. And lo and behold, it works. Ashad is literally eye to eye, and it's a really tense scene, and I quite enjoy it. The Master is utterly in control of this entire episode, and Sacha Dhawan, I'm sorry I was not familiar with your game. You are brilliant. I think the Master we've known in New Who has always been a little bit unhinged, and then it becomes clear his discovery of the Timeless Child drove him even further past insanity. He paralyses the Doctor after inviting Ashad to Gallifrey and gloating over his destruction, proposing an alliance until the eventual true revealed plan later in the episode. Through the Doctor's paralysis, he shows the Doctor the origin of the Time Lords, through like mental projection or something with the Matrix. Now, as interesting as a lot of the content is, and I like seeing the Doctor's reaction to all of it, the exposition is kinda crazy. The Master is literally just telling a story at the camera. We learn how a child was found under a portal somewhere unknown and by an explorer, Tecteun, who was on Gallifrey, before finding that this child can regenerate. And she tests on the child, experimenting on them, splicing that regeneration ability into herself, therefore creating the Time Lords, and then the Gallifrey we know is built on that foundation. I really like that. I mean, we didn't really need an origin for regeneration, it's unnecessary, but it's interesting and makes the Time Lords feel more villainous, and so I don't mind it. The problem is that it's the Doctor. It fucking sucks.
Yeah. I don't know. Alright. Hey. Yeah.
It doesn't inherently mean that the Doctor is this chosen one, but I think this line here from the Master has those implications.
You always behaved like you were different, like you were special. And you were.
That this is the reason she's always been different to the rest of her race. It's also just the origin of the Doctor. Chibnall said he thought it'd add more mystery to the Doctor, but that doesn't make sense. We literally have been given the Doctor's origin, or at least a massive part of it that we didn't have before. This is Doctor Who. Doctor Who. This is a no-go zone, and makes the idea of the character so much less interesting to me. Obviously, it creates so many contradictions with past stories as well. It implies every life cycle they've had, they still get a phone box as a disguise, contradicts episodes from past eras. In fairness though, Doctor Who continuity isn't particularly on point anyway across every era. This episode makes a point to also say that it doesn't matter, and that's the worst offence. What was the point of all of this? It's never explored. We don't get a real look how much it affects the Doctor. The brief hints, the anger within Jodie is great, and it is absurd that it's so minimal throughout this episode and after this, because it's basically not touched on after this. The fact that Davies has done more with the emotional effects than was ever done with this era is crazy. That's why he's the GOAT. Now that I've shit on the concept of it being the Doctor, as I say, this episode itself handles her emotions in a more interesting way. The problem more lies with how it doesn't really seem to have any lasting impact after this. It never really feels like it matters to anyone or anything, but her initial reactions are great and powerful. This scene on the hilltop is just fucking awesome. It feels so raw and so visceral, something we've not seen from this Doctor before really.
Show me the rest.
I'm not sure you can cope with much.
Show me the rest! I have a right to know my own life.
And by the time the Master finishes showing the Doctor all this, she seemingly is just defeated. Her whole life has literally been totally turned around, and it's genuinely effective to me, and these are moments that I think are also enhanced with what Davies has done since then. Later on as well, the Doctor is able to get out, and the moment where she finds the TARDIS and just sits and it's like, I need a minute, and then Chibnall doesn't give her a minute, but you know, I think that's great. I mean, not only has she found all this out, she's also just witnessed the destruction of her planet again. We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit though, so let's go back a little. Ashad is probably the most wasted Doctor Who villain ever. At least I can only speak for modern Who. He shines in Haunting and then takes a bit of a backseat in Ascension, but still keeps a really threatening presence. And we find out that the Cyberium has formed this death particle that will wipe out any organic life in its radius, which, I mean, okay, feels a little gimmicky to me and feels like it was thrown in last minute so it could be used as the resolution, but whatever. But then this episode, the Master just shrinks him and takes the Cyberium, and in that moment he goes a little bit overboard and comes off as the Joker. But I know Ashad returns in Power of the Doctor, but he just doesn't do much. He elevates the episode for sure, but he doesn't actually have any major effect. he doesn't end up being important particularly at all. All the intrigue and interest is totally gone. There is a great moment in this scene though where the Master seems to hint that dying would have almost been a mercy for him at this point, as if he's over the edge and has lost all meaning. But as with so much of this era, there's no depth, it's just a thrown out idea and not utilised. As for the Master's plan, it was actually to use the corpses of the Time Lords and convert them into Cybermen, leading to a new race of Cyber Masters. It's very similar to the Series 8 two-parter, but I don't hate it. The design is good enough, and the concept is interesting at least, and works within this era. I don't really think it'd work in any other era, and I don't have the wish to ever see the Cyber Masters ever again. I think it's fine. I don't hate it. As with everything, it just doesn't fucking go anywhere. The Doctor talking to the fugitive incarnation within the Matrix is so confusing to me, because we've spent this season literally having people tell to the camera essentially how everything is going to change, and then this scene acts as a point to say nothing's actually changed. Then breaking out of the Matrix is pretty fun, to be fair. I do like how the Doctor tries to use what's hurting her into a power, even if it's a little on the nose with using the title theme. So now we get the whole showdown, and the Doctor can take out the Master and his Cyber Masters. It's such a stupid name, but the cost being that it'd kill her too. So she forces everyone into a TARDIS and sends it to Earth, except actually Ko-Shamus, who secretly stayed behind and is going to sacrifice himself and convinces the Doctor to let him do it. I'm sorry, but it feels so out of character for the Doctor to do this, or at least could have been crafted better with better writing for both characters. So that happens, except it doesn't, because the Master and the Cyber Masters and Ashad are all back in the power of the Doctor with no explanation. The Doctor gets sent to space jail, and the episode ends until New Year 2021. Reevaluating these episodes after these last few years makes me sad about how much potential there was here. There is a lot to praise, that I really think there is, but for me, it just doesn't stick the landing, and the entire structure falls because of that. I think the fact the storyline is built upon how big this reveal will be and how it's going to change things, and then simply doesn't, and almost backtracks at the last minute to convince us that nothing's changing, don't worry, it just collapses in on itself. But I do think the added layers that have happened since then do allow more room for enjoyment, because the story of the Giggle, and really the 14th Doctor, being an exploration of how the Doctor hasn't sat and dealt with their feelings and experiences, especially in recent times, RTD overturned the poor writing for the character and storyline and has found a way to represent it respectfully in its own light that, for me personally, just works more.
Handmaid's Tale doesn't mean anything to anyone, to a lot of viewers, genuinely. If you're outside the show, what does that mean? But what it does mean is the Doctor's an orphan. He's abandoned, he was adopted by the Time Lord, so you play that for the emotions. You play the fact that, I don't want to hang things off science fiction words that simply won't mean anything around the breakfast table. But if you're talking about a world in which people adopt children, or foster children, or abandon children, then suddenly you begins to register with you. So that's our take on that, and that's going to have a lot of ammunition and fuel going forward, because of course Millie, as Ruby Sunday, she was abandoned as a foundling on the church doorstep, so you have Doctor and Companion suddenly chiming with their lives and connecting.
Obviously it doesn't really change anything, but something I didn't like becoming an integral part of the character's growth and evolution in a way that I did enjoy and care about is really fascinating to me. But the way it's been looked at since wasn't the approach these episodes and this era took. They went in almost opposite directions, with the addition to lore and that being the point, that it's just backstory. I know for some people the Timeless Child storyline worked, as it was told, and that's great. At the time, I actually really liked it. If you go back through my channel, I think I've got a video saying why I like it, and then like a couple years later, I made a video saying, fuck, I was wrong. And if you do enjoy it as it is, that's great. Honestly, I'm jealous. I wish I could still have that enjoyment for these episodes and the story, but personally, it just doesn't reach the mark by the end for me.